In the past month or so, you may have heard a little bit about the Help to Buy scheme that's currently stalled. So what do I reckon? In case you haven't heard about it, the proposed Help to Buy scheme is a shared equity scheme, which would see Housing Australia support eligible home buyers with an equity contribution of up to 40% for new homes and 30% for existing homes. In return, home buyers would need a minimum 2% deposit to be eligible to participate. So in a nutshell, under this scheme, eligible home buyers would effectively be borrowing from the government, who would in turn take a share in the property until such time as the loan is paid back. The government's contribution to the purchase would either be paid down over time or paid back if the property is sold. But there is some fine print. To be eligible for the scheme, you'd need to earn less than $90,000 per year for singles or $120,000 a year for couples. If you're earning more than that, then this isn't for you. If a home buyer's income exceeds the annual income threshold for 2 consecutive years, they'd be required to repay the government's financial contribution in part or in full, depending on their circumstances. So if you were thinking of applying for the scheme and your annual income was getting close to the threshold, you'd probably want to seek out some solid financial advice before making any decisions. Then there are also price caps on the property that can be purchased under the scheme, and those caps vary by city and state. All that said, broadly the concept makes some sense. It has the potential to help a small number of home buyers get into the market sooner than they'd have otherwise been able to, and therefore it sounds good. It could be used to help those people that don't have access to the bank of mum and dad get a foot in the door, and therefore it feels good. And if this scheme is able to effectively target those that have been historically disadvantaged, it would be hard to argue that it's a bad thing. When it comes to shared equity schemes like this one though, targeting is key, which is something the Productivity Commission have pointed out in the past. In 2022, the Productivity Commission concluded that unless it is well targeted at those experiencing persistent marginalisation in the housing market, assistance to prospective home buyers presents too great a risk of increasing housing demand and consequently housing prices. Resources should instead be directed towards supporting people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. To be fair though, I think the comments from the Productivity Commission likely related to schemes that were far larger in scale than what's been proposed by the current government. So Help to Buy might do for some what it says on the tin, but I think we all need to understand that it's not going to do a thing when it comes to housing affordability for the many. That said, the Greens would have to have rocks in their head to oppose this one. There are valid criticisms you could make of the Help to Buy scheme, but on the whole, they're relatively minor. For example,
the Help to Buy scheme will help get 40,000 Aussies into a home. Why won't you just support that?
Well, the problem is that their scheme will only help 0.2% of renters every year, so 10,000 a year, and actually make housing more expensive for the other 99.8% of renters by driving up the price of housing.
I mean, look, technically he is correct, however, only just. Expert consensus is that it's likely to increase house prices and inflation, but the impact will be minimal to the point it'll go almost unnoticed. Arguing against this one on the grounds that it'll push up property prices is a fool's gambit. And yeah, I think Gambit deserves a standalone X-Men movie too. Matt Grudnoff is a senior economist at the Australia Institute and appeared before the Economics Legislation Committee to speak on the Help to Buy bill, where he outlined some basic truths, which were echoed by many of those that appeared before the committee.
With regard to the Help to Buy scheme, at 10,000 properties per year, this is so small it's unlikely to have a significant impact on overall house prices. The most effective policy for housing affordability that the federal government could pursue is to limit negative gearing and scrap the capital gains tax discount. This would discourage property speculators and reduce the demand for housing. It would mean less housing being sold for renting and more housing being sold for owner-occupiers. It would increase home ownership rates. This would also raise more than $10 billion per year, which could be used to either build more public housing or for other uses. There's been a lot of talk about the importance of supply and increasing supply, and I agree with that. But I don't think supply is the only issue here. And the reason I say that is over the last 10 years, from 2013 to 2023, we've seen the population grow by 15%, and we've seen the number of dwellings increase by 20%. That is, over the last 10 years, dwelling supply outstripped the population. Over that same period, house prices increased by 80%. Let me give you another example. Between March 2020 and March 2022, the borders were effectively shut, and we saw the lowest population growth that we've ever seen. And during that period, house prices increased by a third. So I'm not saying that supply has no impact on house prices. Obviously it does. But there are other issues that swamp the supply side issue, and that is that we have too many speculators in the housing market. Investors invest in something because they hope to get a return, a yield from it. So if you're investing in property, residential property, then you'd hope that the return you'd get in rent would be greater than the costs you incur. But we know that the vast majority of people are negatively geared, so that is not occurring at all. But negative gearing is not a good thing, right, in the long term. Sure, the government foots some of the loss, but they don't foot it all. So you've got to wait for the payoff, and that payoff is the increase in the asset price. Okay, and that's where the capital gains tax discount comes in. It makes that payoff so much larger. But that means we have a whole heap of investors who are only putting money in it because they think that the asset price is going to go up. And that's the definition of speculation. And so what we have at the moment is we have a huge amount of property speculation in the market, and reforming negative gearing and getting rid of the capital gains tax discount will reduce those number of speculators, will take the heat out of the market and make housing more affordable. Yeah, I think that if the government wants more housing, then the government should build more housing. What we need is more public housing. So if we have more public housing, then we have less stress on renters. We increase the supply of housing, and ultimately that will make housing for everybody more affordable, not just for those most in need, those most you would expect to benefit from public housing, but it'll take pressure off the whole chain of, if you like, all the different layers of home buyers, and it'll ultimately make housing more affordable.
What is your particular view about, a home equity scheme that's to assist 40,000 people while all of that policy debate goes on? Should those 40,000 people be denied the opportunity that this bill provides while that debate goes on? Or is it the view of the Australia Institute that we should do this while looking at broader things? What's your specific view about this bill?
Yes, Senator, I can understand your frustration that this is on the help to buy scheme, and the discussion is on broader housing affordability. But I think that's primarily because the best thing you could say about this scheme is that it will be ineffective. That is, it won't increase house prices by very much. If the government wants to pursue housing affordability policies that work, then you'd probably have more discussion around those policies that actually work. I suppose the frustration from somebody who's been watching...
I want to get you on the record, and I'm fine with as I said, there should be a broad debate about housing policy in the community. I just really want to get you on the record. You don't support the bill, is that right?
I'm indifferent to this bill. I don't think it'll make very much difference at all.
All right.
If you want a yes or no.
Ouch.
The reason why this scheme will have an almost non-existent impact on housing prices is simple, and that is the scheme itself is so small that it won't help enough people to make any real difference in the grand scheme of things. At a maximum of 10,000 homes a year, the scheme is so small it's unlikely to have any real impact on property prices as a whole, not enough to distort the market anyway. That's why I'm not buying this argument.
What do you think of the policy idea itself? Would this help to buy scheme actually make things better or worse for those trying to get into the market?
Well, the government scheme would only help 0.2% of renters buy a home every year, and for the other 99.8% of renters in this country, it will actually drive up prices. It will have an inflationary impact.
And you can't have it both ways. You can't argue that it's so small that it'll be ineffective, while at the same time arguing that it'll bump up housing prices. The opposition's arguments against it are even more flimsy.
It's a very small, niche program. Most Australians, and certainly most Australians who want to buy their own home, either won't qualify for this, and if they do, I suspect most would choose to want to purchase a home for themselves, not to co-own a property with the federal government. It's going to be so small, Andrew. I don't think it's going to touch the sides, to be frank.
Now, if you're given the choice of renting for 30 years or having the opportunity to get into the property market, even if that meant that the government held a 30 to 40% share, you could always buy back if you're in a position to do so. What would you prefer? Zooming out though, this is a drop in the ocean when it comes to resolving the housing problem. And for me, that's the issue I really have with Labor's wider housing agenda. They keep pitching it as grand and ambitious, I mean, they're rolling out ambitious in almost every single press release. But you'd have to be hooked on the red Kool-Aid to actually believe that what they've put forward so far is ambitious. I mean, it's not. It's scratching around the edges of a much larger problem. It's a bunch of announcements that sound good in both isolation and as a bundle, but in reality, they're far less than what's required. Have a quick scan of the dot points Labor are rolling out in almost every single housing media release to demonstrate their ambitious housing agenda. Much of the spend outlined here is across multiple years, but putting that aside, if you were to add it all up, the amount spent on this ambitious housing agenda is less than what will be given to landlords in tax handouts in a single year. Tax savings for landlords are forecast to pass $27 billion this year alone. It's forecast that tax concessions for housing investors will cost the country $20 billion a year within the decade. That should really put the various housing announcements made by the government into context. Now ask yourself, what's so ambitious about what Labor are promising so far? Veering off track for a minute, one of these dot points always catches my eye. Increasing the maximum rate of Commonwealth rent assistance by 15%, the largest increase in more than 30 years. Like a lot of these dot points, it sounds super impressive until you hit with a dose of reality. This increase was costed at $2.7 billion over 4 years, so $675 million a year, a 15% increase. Now look at the rate median rental prices have increased, particularly in the past 3 years or so, and you can pretty quickly understand why many have argued that this 15% increase is far from adequate. The Grattan Institute have said that the government could boost the maximum rate of rent assistance by 40% rather than just 15%, and only then would they be providing the same real level of support for low-income earners as the government did 15 years ago. In case the problem's not clear enough, since August 2020 alone, median rent prices have increased 37.5%. In the context of where we're at today, talking up a 15% increase to rent assistance is not the flex the government might think it to be.
Following is a public service announcement.
If you're an ALP diehard and you're sick of seeing this guy on your telly talking about housing, it might be worth encouraging the government to do better on housing, because with a third of the population renting, a decent proportion of them likely feeling abandoned, and a federal housing minister who's largely been absent from the debate, if nothing changes, it looks like housing could be on the agenda for quite some time. Anyway, back to the point, and that is the amount of money the government is spending on their ambitious housing agenda pales into insignificance to what's being dished out to landlords on an annual basis. To put it another way, more money is being spent on fueling the problem than is being spent on actually fixing the problem. So Help to Buy, it may help a small number of Australians get into the property market a lot sooner than they'd have otherwise been able to, and that would be a good thing. If, as independent MP Zoe Daniel has proposed, the scheme is able to target those that have been historically disadvantaged, then that would be a good thing too. As far as housing goes, this is really a feel-good policy. It's inoffensive. It'll sound good when the government wants to name drop some policy titles at doorstops and the like. In my view, there's really no practical reason to block this bill. We just need to acknowledge and understand that this will have an incredibly small impact when you consider the grand scheme of things. For the small number of people this will help, congratulations. For the vast majority of people it won't help, good luck, I guess.